Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of TADA Talks. Today's podcast is sponsored by Dealer Security. I'm Todd Burgon, the Executive Director of the TADA. Our topic today will be on vehicle theft in the new car industry. Joining me to discuss this is Jordan Chezy from Dealer Security.
Thank you.
Tell me, Jordan, a little bit about your background and a little bit about your company, Dealer Security, before we get going on our topic today.
Yeah, so Dealer Security is primarily focused on protecting the automotive industry. We've been in business for about 5 years now. We are a sister company to A&R Solutions, which has been around for about 16 years. We support over 20% of the dealers coast to coast throughout Canada. So Dealer Security's purpose is to focus on protection of physical assets as well as cyber risk within the dealership organization.
And you've been with them since the beginning, Jordan?
Yes.
Excellent. So I've been hearing for the last number of months from our dealer members and also from the insurance underwriters that vehicle theft is becoming a growing concern in the new car dealerships. What have you been seeing on your side as far as that specific area of the business?
Absolutely. I mean, especially since the pandemic started early last year, we've seen, I'd say, 4 or 5 times the number of events every night in activity on site. And it's not just related to vehicle theft per se, it's also about parting out vehicles. So, we're seeing a large uptick in, tires being stolen. You may have read in automotive news recently that there's a Ford store where all of the tires were stolen off a number of the vehicles. And in situations like that, it's not just the tires missing, it's the vehicle damage that occurs, during such an activity of taking the tires off or removing catalytic converters is common in diesel trucks. We're seeing a lot of broken glass and vehicle damage related to the removal of airbags. We're also seeing a lot of dealers doing a lot to try and help manage and mitigate what they can to move cars around the lot to better lit areas to try and bring this under control. Better view of cameras, and we're seeing more installations of the club on steering wheels, or dealers are removing airbags altogether out of vehicle inventory.
So tell me a little bit about, sounds like there's 2 sides of this, right? There's the parts side where they're parting cars, basically, new vehicles as they sit in the lot. And then there's the actual physical theft of the entire vehicle. So let's start with the physical theft of the entire vehicle. What are some of the tactics that you're seeing that thieves are using to steal these vehicles today that might help our dealers maybe think a little bit about what they are doing or currently need to do to protect themselves a little bit more? Because clearly, as theft increases, so do their rates for insurance increase. So there's definitely a need for them to pay attention to this. So let's talk about the physical vehicle being entirely stolen first.
So what we're seeing with entire vehicles being stolen appears to be centered around organized crime still. The activity is very swift and quick. There's a case of an auto park out west where they lost 20 vehicles in one night. And it was a swift action. Van came in, I'd say about 20 individuals. I think 2 vans brought 20 individuals total, obviously, to drive the vehicles out. This was a planned attack on the dealers. And there's a lot of technology that's being utilized within the dealerships where people they're dressing well, they're walking through with devices to scan for key fobs. They're targeting key machines or key management tools that they're being used, and whether it's a pegboard or a manual system. They're doing their homework and research currently to go into dealers. And we've even seen extreme cases where within 2 minutes, a 1-ton truck might show up to the front of the locked gate, chain it up, pull it off, and go in, take the cars and leave. And this can be as fast as a 2-minute activity. So we're still seeing a lot of that organized activity with entire vehicle theft. The second part of it is parting out. And the pandemic has definitely increased a lot of desperation in the economy. People need to survive. People are finding ways to repair vehicles and deal with damage. There's a lot more petty theft occurring from less organized crime, and you can tell by the movement patterns on site when it's more organized versus less organized. So we're seeing a lot of part out type theft on sites as well.
So when you talk about the sophistication of these thieves that that are part of organized crime or even not part of organized crime, especially when you're talking about, the scanning of the fobs themselves for the vehicles, um, what is it that something the dealerships can do to either recognize these individuals or to protect themselves? Because a lot of them would tell me that I already locked my keys up, but what more can I do? So that's the first question I'll ask. And the second part of my question is with regards to, how is it that, when we're during a pandemic, that they can actually help use the pandemic, it sounds terrible, to their advantage when the dealership is on a by appointment only basis? Does that make it easier for them to control that? So I'll let you answer the first part.
So the first part really boils down to better key management within the store. I think we can all say we've seen it in various stores where going through a service department, you might have loose keys left on top of desks or even behind desks. Service advisors might, with good intention, try to be discreet about the storage of keys. But that said, they're still left out in the open. Salespeople might have keys left on their desks. There might be some sitting in deal jackets and F&I offices. It boils down to discipline and structure around how the keys are managed on site. With a proper key management system that's properly secured in a secure and safe location that is more at a site of the general public, where there's an audit trail. You can put keys in these key management systems. You can log the users that are taking them out for how long they are, the mileage that's driven, the vehicles that are driven. We can have alerts generated. We see alerts generated with these systems. There's KPIs that come out of it as well to look for patterns and key movements. So knowing where all the keys are at all times, I think, is paramount to how that's being handled to try to reduce the risk of fobs being scanned throughout the dealership.
So just before you finish on point number one, let me ask you this, because I don't know the answer to this, but maybe the average person doesn't either. What are they physically using to scan these keys? Like, is it their cell phone? Like, what is it that someone should be looking for if, for something that looks suspicious to them in the service area or in the F&I office, if you're working in one of these dealerships?
So imagine a bag. There's a bag with a computer device, and oftentimes, we've seen people go through and the bag's on their shoulder. It looks like they're dressed for work, but they're walking around, and this bag has a reach of, let's say, as far as 10, 20 feet out to scan for fob codes, because fobs do broadcast, and it's almost difficult to tell when there's a stranger walking through a building. So, the dealers need to be vigilant in knowing, okay, where are our keys? Who should be in these restricted areas and who shouldn't be? And they should all work together amongst their staff to try and check in on, hey, if there's someone who appears that they shouldn't be in a certain area, ask them if they need some help. Hey, do you need help finding something? To try and deter them out from that protected area where the keys are often kept.
Mm-hmm. So the second part of my question was to do with the pandemic, and I know that you deal nationally with your company, but we're talking specifically about Ontario under the TADA. That in two separate occasions, showrooms were shut down by appointment only. Do you think that is a bit of an advantage in that particular case to control? And have you seen a difference in vehicle theft while these showrooms were under appointment only? Because I would think that, when what you're talking about, and certainly my goal isn't to limit footsteps for dealerships, that's not what we want to do here, but I'm wondering if you saw any trending during the shutdown when there were less footprint happening through the dealerships because of the restrictions that were in place.
Absolutely. And, we love to have more foot traffic in our dealerships. However, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that the traffic has been controlled within the buildings. And I will say we've seen quite a decline. Much fewer vehicles have been stolen in their entirety. The crime seems to be now residing within the petty theft and the part outs of the vehicles. Vehicles being stolen, for other crime, but it's mostly about one-off petty theft.
Are there any specific makes or models that you're seeing that have been targeted to the parts side or even the full vehicle side?
So the parts side, definitely the German brands within the GTA have been targeted. A lot of those components are very expensive. You could be paying up to $2,500 for a headlight, for example, in some of these vehicles. So that's one area. We saw a situation a couple of weeks ago where it was a Dodge Ram that had been parted out. So the front grille, the bumper, the radiator, and some of the components within the front end of the vehicle had been removed, which tells us this was targeted for the purpose of repairing a Dodge Ram, because why else would they steal the hoods, right? So, but a lot of expensive components in luxury vehicles, and then we're seeing a lot of theft with respect to trucks.
And do you guys see anything that right now that you would kind of be able to demonstrate that there's a difference between having, say, human security versus technology as a security source for these dealerships that are being targeted for parts? Like, is there any difference between the two? In other words, having a security guard or having, some of the, as you know, some of the yards have overnight dogs in them. Versus a more technology-based type security. Like, talk to me a little bit about what your viewpoint is of that and what you guys see in that in the market.
We're experiencing situations where both environments exist, of course. There are a lot of groups out there that employ physical guards, and these guards, there might be one or two guards assigned to a cluster of 5 or 6 stores, and their job is to go around and just kind of show some presence on site. And during their downtime, they'll be in the dealership looking at a screen of cameras throughout the night. But in reviewing footage, we do see that guards in the middle of the night do fall asleep. And, it's physically impossible for them to have eyes on everything. The other challenge, too, is, having a guard go to respond to something outside is not wise either, because we've seen some beat up before by thieves. And their job really should not be for the response to a crime, but identifying it and dispatching police. Where we're seeing a lot more success out there is in the proper use of surveillance systems, more as preventative tools rather than reactive tools. So there's a lot of technology out there now where surveillance systems can be properly administered and put to use, where there are multiple eyes on the site. So you don't need the guard service handling this. Something like this can be managed by a centralized environment. And then the video cameras can fully qualify and actually detect whether it's a human or an automobile on site. So the central is getting notification as soon as someone's on site. So they're reviewing it, they're validating it, and then they're utilizing live talk down to try and deter the crime. So the purpose really is to prevent the crime from happening. And these centrals often have access to police dispatch and police detachments to dispatch cruisers on site. And where we're seeing a lot of success in the metro areas is response within minutes. And a lot of jurisdictions now will not respond with police cruisers unless there's video verification in place. So there's definitely an increasing need for video surveillance to validate the crime that's happening on site.
Interesting. I didn't know that was the case as far as response from the police side. Is there any technology out there that exists today that would be able to pick up inside the dealership if there was an instrument that was scanning or putting out some type of a signal that can be detected if someone was in the dealership with a device in their bag or their handbag that you spoke of earlier?
To properly mitigate this, I think it's important to really focus on the awareness of who's around the restricted areas. Because a lot of these wireless frequency devices, although you can block wireless frequency from transmitting, you can never really, check and easily validate what's happening, especially with a key fob scanner. So there are wireless blockers there, but the challenge with that is then you're inadvertently blocking other frequencies such as Wi-Fi and cellular and legitimate fob activity. So it's one of those things that's a lot more difficult to detect.
Yeah, I figured if it was that easy, somebody would have already come up with the technology and made a lot of money off it, right?
Well, there are some technologies out there, but nothing that has been really fully employed for that purpose that I've seen.
I know back, years ago, we were educated that a lot of these vehicles that are stolen were in shipping containers and being shipped pretty much the same day. Just out of curiosity, I haven't ventured into that topic in probably 6 or 7 years. Has that changed? Like, how fast do these cars leave our province? Do they stay in the province when they're stolen from an organized crime perspective? What sort of intel do you have on that?
What I know of the current environment is actually there's a shortage of shipping containers taking place, and it's really messed up our worldwide supply chain system. So there would be a lot of activity in the past where, especially these luxury vehicles, uh, you know, German vehicles, let's say for example, would be put on a shipping container, and within 6 hours they'd be on their way. What we're seeing a lot of right now is vehicles being stolen for the purpose of additional thefts. So someone might go on site, take a vehicle, that is their new getaway vehicle. It's basically untraceable because it's not their vehicle, and then they'll use it and then they'll abandon the vehicle later on.
I want to end on a light note. I have a couple more quick questions for you. What was the first car you owned, and why did you pick that make or model? I like to ask people that before we wrap up these sessions.
Kind of a fun question. It was sometime halfway through my undergrad years where I lived in Toronto, and I just landed a job outside of the city. So I needed a vehicle to get there. And if you can imagine one of those, questionable used vehicle dealerships somewhere in North York, kind of in a back alley. It was in a trailer, kind of resembled a junkyard of sorts. So my first vehicle was a 1997 Plymouth Breeze. And it drove okay, and paid a couple grand cash for it on the spot. The guy said, "Come back in 4 hours, I'll have it safety for you." And I drove it off the lot. It was plated and everything. So the thing had 4 cracked tires and no brakes, and it was overall a lemon for the 4 or 5 year period I owned it. And it just underscores the importance and relevance of OEM dealers and reputable sources for vehicles within the GTA.
I didn't know that story, and you couldn't be a better ad for why to buy from an OEM dealership when you tell me those things. That's fantastic. Listen, I think that you're very knowledgeable in this topic, and your company is doing some great things. I want to thank you, Jordan. I want to thank your company, Dealer Security, for not only sharing your knowledge on vehicle theft, but also sponsoring our podcast today. I'd like to have you back. I'd like to talk about the other side of your business, which I think is really important for our dealer members, and that's on cybersecurity. So I hope that in the near future, you'll join me again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks again, Jordan. This is Todd Burgon wrapping up this session of TADA Talks. Have a great day.